Good morning, and can I welcome members to the 25th meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2012, and can I remind members and those in the public gallery to ensure that all electronic devices are switched off at all times, particularly mobile phones. Can I welcome to the committee Colin Beattie, a new member, and can I also say that we've had apologies have been received from our Deputy Convener today, Neil Finlay, and can I welcome to the committee Mark Griffin as his substitute. Good morning and welcome to you both. The first item on the agenda is to invite Colin to declare any registrable interests which are relevant to the committee's remit. Colin.
Thank you, Convener. I'd refer members to my register of interest, but specifically in view of the remit of the committee to my role as Trustee Director of the National Mining Museum of Scotland.
Thank you very much, Colin, for that. Mark, as committee substitute, and this is your first time appearing at the committee, do you also wish to declare any registrable interests which are relevant to the committee's remit?
Thank you, Convener. No interest to declare.
Okay, thank you very much to you both. Can I move on to our second item this morning? Agenda item 2 is an evidence session on the Scottish Government's draft budget 2013-14. The committee has agreed that the following broad objectives will shape our scrutiny in this year's draft budget: to determine how last year's final allocations helped the Scottish Government to deliver its policy objectives, to identify the progress that remains to be made and how the allocations in this year's draft budget will help to achieve this, and thirdly, to assess how spending on FE and HE is contributing to the Scottish Government's overarching purpose of increasing sustainable economic growth. The committee, of course, took evidence last Tuesday and will have 2 evidence sessions today before taking evidence from both Cabinet Secretaries on the 23rd of October. Our first panel this morning will provide the private sector's views on the draft budget, and can I welcome to the committee James Alexander, who is the Senior Policy and Communications Manager with the Scottish Council for Development and Industry, Amy Dalrymple, Policy and Research Manager, Scottish Chambers of Commerce, and of course Mary Goodman, Senior Policy Advisor for the Federation of Small Business. Welcome to you all this morning. I'm going to just go straight to questions, if you don't mind. We've got a lot on the agenda this morning, and invite members to indicate when they've got a question to ask, but I want to begin by asking Neil Bibby to lead us off.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. Last week we had concerns from Unison, the EIS, the UCU, the NUS about concerns over cuts and specifically about concerns over cuts to college funding. I'd like to ask you, we've heard varying different numbers in terms of what people believe the cut to colleges is. I would like to ask you what you understand the cuts to be, and also we had concerns last week that cuts to colleges will harm or potentially harm economic recovery. And would you agree with that statement?
Who wishes to kick off? James?
Happy to go first. Thank you, Convener, and thank you for the invitation today. In terms of, I'm not going to try and give an actual number, but I think what is evident from our perspective is that there has been a cut to college budgets, that the budget now has had more money put into it, but that still doesn't make up for the cut over the last couple of years that we've seen in college budgets. And I suppose our priority as an organisation is to make sure that colleges, which are vital organisations in terms of delivering the skills needed to power the economy in organisations across the country, particularly small businesses, and I'm sure Mary has more to say about that, is ensuring that colleges are able to continue to deliver those skills that businesses require, because skills are a key part of taking Scotland from where we are economically into the upturn. And I think if we aren't providing the right skills, certainly the skills that employers need at the right place and the right time, then that's going to be challenging economically. And I know that colleges are doing a lot of work within the budget settlement they've got, but we've got to make sure that they have the resources to deliver the skills the economy needs.
I agree with James and your witness Jeremy Peat last week. If even the great economist Jeremy Peat can't give you a figure, I'm not even going to attempt to. I'm really sorry about that. Because the way the budget is shifting, there's more funding for student places. We're looking at maybe cuts in the teaching budget, but there's a lot of other money out there as well through the youth employment budget. It's a complex map, and one of the things that Scottish Chambers of Commerce have called for is a review of all that to make it a little bit more accessible, to simplify the environment somewhat, because it's an opaque system, not just in terms of its funding, but also in terms of the way that the different parts of the system work together. And you know, that's across the whole of the post-16 education system in Scotland. So I think that's important to note, is how complex it is. The other thing, in response to your specific question about how any cuts might have, you know, what impact they might have, particularly on the economy, our local chambers are, many of them, very involved with their local colleges. Chamber board members are on the boards of colleges. Most of the colleges are members of their local Chamber of Commerce. There's a really good relationship. And there's a big concern to make sure that we maintain local provision, maintain the quality of provision that we get across many of our colleges at the moment, that colleges are still able to deliver a responsive and you know, kind of business-friendly range of courses that's at the, you know, that is responding to what businesses need, but also the quality that they need as well. This is what needs to be looked at. If the budget that the Scottish Government has given the colleges can produce that, then that's fine. But we need to be realistic about the fact that maintaining that kind of provision in the face of a cut in budget is going to have implications for the way that colleges need to run themselves. And as I say, it's just about being realistic about that. The priority needs to be the quality of provision, the extent of provision in terms of the amount, the courses that colleges provide, and maintaining local provision.
Anything to add, Mary?
Just to say that while we're not going to make any comments about the actual sums of money, it's important that we look at how well that money is spent. We just echoing what Amy and James have said, that we are operating in a time of constraint, and we have to recognise that, and we have to be realistic. And the more efficient and the more rationalised that we can be in the delivery of our public services, the better, in theory. But colleges do have a potential to meet the needs of local businesses far better than they currently do. There's a lot of good practice out there, but it could be far wider spread. And we welcome the injection of the additional 17 million that was announced in the budget, although we would like to see how exactly that is going to be spent, and a bit of demonstration about how effective that spending is going to be. We're looking with interest at the mergers of various colleges and the federalisation into regions, and we can see that there's opportunities there for efficiencies and a sort of reduction in the confusion of various different offerings delivered by colleges in the same area. However, we're also slightly concerned about the geographic barriers that might occur as rationalisation kicks in. And so we'll be looking to see how that plays out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, we've received evidence from Scotland's colleges which says that there's been an 80,000 drop in the number of students studying in colleges since 2008-2009. In the SCDI's written evidence, you state that Scotland must match and beat its competitors in terms, I presume that's talking about having a skilled and educated workforce. Therefore, do you believe that the college cuts will make that more difficult, given that we've got a reduction in the number of students studying in courses? Also, I'd like to ask about, in the same evidence, you stated that there should be no limit to the recruitment of students in STEM subjects and need to maintain student numbers. Are you therefore concerned that we to see kind of newspaper reports of waiting lists of 10,000 long in terms of people looking for a college course? And in terms of those people looking for a college course, does that include the STEM subjects?
I think in terms of student numbers, I think there is a debate to be had about whether we want to see fewer students on full-time courses or more students on part-time courses. And I think I can see both sides of that debate, and our members can see both sides of that debate. I suppose if we were to take a bigger picture perspective, what we want to ensure and to see is colleges delivering and working with businesses to deliver the skills that are needed in the economy. And that's the bottom line of what we want to see achieved. And whether that is having more part-time provision or more full-time provision, we've got to make sure that people are able to get those skills. Now, if there are many people that are, and I don't know if this is the case, the colleges are giving evidence later, they can answer that for you, but I don't know if it's the case, but there may be lots of people on waiting lists, and if there are, there's a potential question to be asked around, are those people getting the skills that are required to allow them to play a full productive role in the economy, or is it better that the people that are in colleges are given a broader range of skills to allow them to play a greater part? There's some questions, and the committee needs to perhaps consider those. STEM and science and technology are huge parts of Scotland's economy. We have a massive oil and gas industry. We're trying to develop a world-leading renewables industry. Science and technology exist across huge other parts of our economy, life sciences, for example. We cannot underestimate the importance of STEM skills. The Energy Skills Academy that was launched announced in the budget, we're quite excited about that. We want to see more details about that. We want to see that working with SCDI's network of young engineers and science clubs, because that's an important way that we see 10,000 kids are currently involved in that in schools across Scotland. So STEM is a hugely important part of it, and we know the government sees that, and we want to make sure that colleges are doing all that they can to deliver the STEM skills in the economy. I think what's also important is, and this might occur from the regionalisation of colleges, is colleges spending more time engaging further than they do currently with businesses, particularly local businesses, and a big regional college is maybe more able to engage with a broader range of businesses to make sure that the courses they're offering, the skills they're delivering, meet the needs of employers in their area, so that people going through the college system are able to get the skills that then employers can immediately put to use. And of course, that's not just the technical skills or the vocational skills in a particular occupation, it's the broader business skills that sometimes are called soft skills. I don't think soft skills is the right phrase, because they're not side skills, they're not easy skills to learn, they're actually very difficult and very important. They're things like customer service, sales, team working, leadership, entrepreneurship, particularly entrepreneurship within an organisation. How can we make sure that all of these skills are being delivered? Because if we can get this right, and you talked about competitiveness globally, if we can get this right in Scotland, this delivery of business skills, the delivery of skills that employers need, and ensuring that young people coming through the system have all the skills that are needed in the economy, then we will become a world leader and become more competitive in skills in Scotland.
If you've got anything to add which is different, please do so, but you don't have to repeat the same stuff, because I want to move on as quickly as possible to lots of other questions. But go ahead if you have. Amy?
Just very briefly then, Stuart, I think there's a tension maybe in terms of budgeting and policy with this government between the short-term challenges that we're facing in terms of youth employment and, so the opportunities for all policy and the funding that's behind that in terms of trying to, kind of make sure that our young people are, kind of have these opportunities if they aren't able to get work. And the broader strategic needs of how our further and higher education system and our economy interact with each other. I won't go any further, but I just say that I think it's important to bear in mind that there is that tension when we're looking at this budget, and when you as MSPs are scrutinising this budget, is kind of some of the policies come from that long-term strategic aim, and some of them come from that kind of urgent need to tackle what is a crisis at the moment, and balancing them is a tricky thing to do.
Can I just say a couple of things? Again, within the sort of limits of reality, we have to think about college funding particularly, and the way that colleges deliver their provision, particularly in terms of context. And we have talked for many years in education, further education and higher education about lifelong learning. And from an individual point of view, lifelong learning is about realising I need to learn this skill. for this particular purpose, particularly at the college level, and then accessing that at the time that's good for them. And similarly, in terms of business, it's businesses investing in the skills of their staff and recruiting from the body of students that have come through a system for their needs and their context. And co-investment is something that has come up quite a lot in the post-16 reforms, consultation and so on. And that's not something that we should ignore, but at the same time, you can't expect to sell something to somebody based on the way it's always been. It has to be based on what both individuals and businesses need at the time. And that's why we have really put forward this idea of being as flexible as possible with the provision, allowing people to dip in and dip back out again. Now, I know that that has issues with stability in terms of a college being able to fund itself long term and maintain its provision. But in as much as we can, I think we really need to explore this idea of flexibility, allowing people to dip in and out again.
Ian MacArthur.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, just following up the point in relation to STEM subjects, James, I think in your evidence you suggest there should be no limit to the recruitment of students in STEM subjects. I appreciate that there's probably an issue here in relation to universities as well as colleges, but is it your view that then colleges are failing in their responsibility to meet the demand coming for the private sector, or is the demand from the private sector not there or not clear enough, or the messages from them back to colleges somehow not getting through? I'm struggling to understand where that mismatch is occurring.
I think some of the mismatch comes in demand from potential students to study science and technology subjects, and I've mentioned our Young Engineers Clubs. What that's trying to do, and I know there's other things operating like that, is trying to enthuse young people with the potential and the opportunities for careers in science and engineering and STEM. I think there's a whole range of areas where we're not getting the numbers of people going through STEM subjects as we'd like to. I'm not sure that there's any particular area to blame for that. I think what we need to do is consider how we move forward from our current position, which is an awareness that we don't have enough skills in STEM, and try and fix that. And that will require colleges and universities to work very closely with schools, with young people that are interested in STEM, but also with businesses to make sure that there is that flow of people going through, but also people that are in those industries, which of course are one of the fastest moving industries when you think of the new technologies coming on stream, making sure that the industries themselves have the opportunities to work with the education sector to upskill their current workforce and make sure that the skills that are on the ground in industries are the skills that are necessary.
Joan McAlpine.
Yes, if I could just go back to this point, Convener, on student numbers that was quoted earlier by Mr Bibby, and the fall in student numbers of 80,000. In the evidence from Scotland's colleges, it says that the full-time equivalent numbers remained constant at 126,000. So given the, I would have said, the generally supportive comments that you've all made about further education reform, would you say that what's more important is that those 126,000 full-time equivalent numbers that have been retained are actually serving the needs of business? So it shouldn't really be, a numbers game if we're talking about the loss of maybe some more part-time students. It's what the colleges that are delivering that's more important.
I think that's where colleges' links with local businesses are absolutely vital. I know that for years colleges have been engaging with the local businesses, and if we should be providing colleges with the autonomy to engage with their businesses and say the best thing that we can deliver is to put our sums or our student numbers into this provision, whether that be part-time or full-time. So I think the challenge is for colleges to maintain the quality of provision by delivering the same number of sums or FTEs within a reduced budget settlement, and that's the challenge that colleges have got.
Just to pick up,
No, I was just going to say this whole, well, we obviously come from a a perspective of wanting the education system to deliver for Scotland's businesses and therefore Scotland's economy. The Scottish Government's whole massive programme of post-16 reform kicked off with the pre-legislative consultation, putting learners at the centre. And so, and it was about developing a learner-centred education system. And so the discussions that we've had over the last kind of year or so, and will continue to have, are about kind of how we balance all the different needs of the stakeholders. But the Scottish Government was very clear that it wanted a learner-centred system. And I think that maybe while I and my colleagues here are obviously going to say that we need colleges to be running courses that are responsive to business needs and putting students through the right courses, the issue of student numbers is it's more about kind of what they offer and making sure that it's not creating other problems. If some school leavers, for example, are moving into modern apprenticeships or are moving straight into work, and that's what they want to do, and that's appropriate for them, and that's going to give them the opportunity to pursue a career that includes progression and that gives them job satisfaction and that contributes to the economy, then we're not going to fight that. If that's what's appropriate, we need to be keeping an eye on whether it's appropriate or not. But it ain't just about making sure that everybody goes to college. It's about making sure that businesses get the employees they need, and it's about making sure that students get the education they need. If that's through college, we want the funding to be there to enable them to do that at college and to enable them to do the right courses at college. But you've got to dig right into those figures. It's not just about the headlines that are at the top there. I hope that's helpful.
Sure. I think from my perspective, the pattern that you're pointing out about more full-time, less part-time, could be seen from our point of view as slightly worrying, because if those part-time people are people in work or doing part-time work, part-time college course, that's the kind of pattern that we'd like to see more of in terms of vocational training. However, you do need to dig a little bit deeper, as Amy says, because you could be looking at part-time leisure courses, you could be looking at all sorts of different types of part-time provision that have fallen away over the last, not provision, but sort of accessing that provision over the last little while. And so I would probably want to look maybe a little bit closer at those patterns and see what's happening, see how the student market is reacting to the economic situation. But in terms of full-time provision, of course, businesses will recruit people who've done a full-time course if they have the skills necessary to do the job. What frequently happens is that they feel that maybe those full-time students perhaps need to have been a little better prepared for the world of work. And a lot of the feedback that we've had from our members have been around, actually a bit of work-based training is great because we can give them that grounding in what the world of work is about while they go away and learn the theory at college. But the difficulty with that in terms of business is that with the bottom line being so tough at the moment, the time of their staff spent away at college can be a real barrier to employers investing in college training at the moment. But obviously, I don't know what lies beneath the top line of those figures that you're mentioning.
So from a small businesses point of view, the opportunities for all, the focus on employability skills for young people, you would be supportive of that?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And one last thing, in your written evidence, you made the comment that only 10% of your members had been contacted by a college in the last 12 months, but 43% found interaction useful. Do you think college reform will improve that situation? It seemed to me that, 10% just wasn't good enough, really, that there really ought to be far more interaction between colleges and small businesses.
With that, yes, we really hope that college reform will deliver that kind of change, that step change. We feel that there's vast potential for colleges to contribute to economic recovery and economic resilience. And I think that there is a lot of untapped potential, and there's also a lot of very good practice out there that could be replicated in other areas.
Smith.
Just to follow on for that, Mary Goodman, can I just clarify that when you used that figure of only 10% and then you said the 43% finding the interaction was useful, was that part of the 10% or is that, so it's 43% out of the 10%?
Yes.
Right, so that is really quite a low statistic then.
Yep.
Just to move on from that, Mr. Alexander and Ms. Dalrymple have both mentioned this issue, and I will call them soft skills for the time being, given that's what the briefing has given us. You're right, they are difficult. Could you be a bit more specific about what needs to be done to improve the employability of our youngsters in these relevant soft skills?
We've been working on kind of several parallel projects about this. One of them, the SDS and the SQA are developing a certificate of work readiness, which we're working with them on, which will kind of demonstrate to an employer that people actually have these skills. It's at very early stages yet, but I'd urge you to keep an eye on it if you're interested. I've been talking to a lot of schools, universities and colleges about what they variously call the universities talk about graduate attributes, for example. And what it's about is about the student being able to articulate that they can do this. A lot of students are developing during the course of their work skills like project management, presentation skills, team working skills, communication skills. But they aren't being taught that they have this. They aren't being told that they have this. I was talking to, I better not say who it was, a very senior civil servant who has experience in the teaching profession, let's say, who mentioned that often, you know, kind of our school children are very good at identifying, yes, I'm working in a team, you know, and then they come up to the latter stages of secondary school, perhaps, and suddenly something happens because they're concentrating very hard on their exams, and it's all about, and all they're being taught about is not, you know, kind of it's very exam focused. It's about how much French do you know. It's about how much algebra do you know, and the priority is downgraded about these broader life skills, soft skills, employability skills. And I think that we need to maintain that focus. The onus needs to be on a job applicant to be able to say, I can work in a team and I can communicate, because an employer cannot be expected to learn about the kind of plethora of different systems that a school or a college or a university might have of recognising these skills. But the educational institution, and we're not asking a lot, we're not asking them to invest money or a lot of resource or anything, it's just a bit of a mindset change into realising that part of their responsibility as an educational institution is to support their students to get a job once they've finished their course. And that means that they need to know that when they're working on a team presentation, the skills that they're using in terms of project management, in terms of teamwork, in terms of communication, they need to, you know, kind of the educational leaders in those institutions can be supporting their students to identify, well, I've got these. And there needs to be something else which enables the students to fill in gaps, maybe. I mean, I did a, you know, kind of liberal arts degree and got a 2-2, and there were plenty of kind of gaps in the skills that actually, if I'd realised I had those gaps, I could have done something about it, maybe in my summer jobs while I was at university. Now, things have moved on a lot in the many years since I was at university, but it's something about just a change in mindset there, and it can be done because I've seen it done in several institutions throughout the educational system.
Thank you very much for a very comprehensive, very interesting answer as well. Could I just pursue that a little bit further? I mean, would you agree with groups like the CBI and many other business organisations who are saying that, yes, I think they would agree with a lot of what you say, but there is a more important point here, that in the standard of basic literacy, I don't mean just reading skills and how we normally define literacy, but in terms of what they're coming away from school, for some businesses, they're making the comment that it isn't good enough, and therefore, as a result, they don't have sufficient confidence to develop some of the other skills that you're discussing just now. Would you accept that the CBI and some of these other business groups are correct in that? Do we need to do more at school level to provide the core skills, which then are much of the basic building blocks for what you're suggesting?
Well, as a business group ourselves, you know, we have our members feeding this sort of thing into us as well. Yes, there are problems with some job applicants in areas of literacy and numeracy, but didn't raise that because I thought that, you know, kind of there would be agreement amongst everyone that that is a core standard. It does need to happen. I don't think that we need to... I don't, you know, kind of in terms of if we're building up a hierarchy, you know, kind of something, you know, a learning hierarchy, similar to Maslow's hierarchy, I don't think we're looking at things like teamwork and cooperation as necessarily things that can be built on. You don't, that literacy and numeracy should come with, alongside the teamwork, the cooperation, the project management, the confidence to do that sort of, to be in a business and a work environment. They come alongside each other, and the one set of skills supports the other set of more kind of mechanical, how I can read, write, and how numerate I am. Those sorts of skills, they can support each other. I don't think you're necessarily about one coming first.
Is it a correct view amongst quite a high proportion of the business community that the core skill element is not sufficiently broad and of a sufficient quality to allow some of the young people who are coming into the business world to function as well as they might do, and for some of your colleagues in the business community to have to spend quite a bit of money helping them address some of these core skills? Is that a correct reflection or not?
That's not a consistent view, but it is a view that we get from several of our members, yeah.
Just one final point, if I may, Convener. Could I just ask about the situation where we're being told that for sort of intermediate level skills, a number of graduates who are picking up a lot of these jobs at the moment, and therefore there's additional pressure for FE graduates and people in the business community. Is that a fair reflection?
I would say yes, and I think where that poses particular challenges is everything's moved down. So there's the group of mostly young people, and we've seen it in the youth unemployment numbers. There's the group of people that struggled even in the good times economically to get employment. They're the ones that are really struggling now, and I think they need to be really prioritised in both the provision of skills and support to get into the labour market.
We're working with the Scottish Government to prioritise what we're graduate recruitment incentive programme to try and tackle this, because that kind of displacement argument is one of the it has the potential to have a real long-term implication on the employability of this whole generation. And, you know, kind of, so when we're looking to the long term, trying to tackle a short-term crisis, I mentioned before, that tackling that underemployability issue is really important. And I can make sure that the committee have details of the graduate recruitment incentive, which is being piloted with 4 of our chambers.
Okay, thank you. Liam MacArthur.
Question on based on what James has just said there about graduate unemployment or employment. Notice from the evidence you refer to the fact that while graduate unemployment is a significant problem, young people with lower level skills are far more likely to be unemployed. I mean, this seems to contradict figures released by University of Scotland last week, but I think the implication of what you and Amy are both saying is that it's more an issue of underemployment than it is an issue of unemployment. We actually need to be quite careful about the language we're using here. Is that a fair assessment?
That probably is fair. I think we've got a huge amount of skills in the country, and we've just talked, you know, the last half hour about developing the skills that employers need, and then we've got a group of people that have got the skills employers need, and they're not being put in a position where those skills are being used. So, you know, employers and educational institutions and young people themselves have all got a responsibility to be maximising skills wherever possible, and that's quite hard to do, particularly where we are economically, but something we've got to focus on.
Okay, thank you. George Adam.
Yes, some of this has already been discussed, but with the change in colleges taking on a bigger role in training for employment, opportunities for all in the National Training Programme, the Modern Apprenticeship Scheme changing, what is the role now for the private sector now, in your opinion? What can they offer?
training sector or the
Private sector in general for training.
I think the private sector has got a huge role to work with colleges in particular to develop and co-develop the educational provision that will be relevant to their own needs as a business. So, for example, that might be working with a college to deliver a training program after work for their own employers or employees in their own establishment. You know, these are the sorts of flexible provision that we want to see happening across Scotland, and that involves colleges and employers working together to create that.
Yeah. Go on, Mary.
I've got to say that while there is a huge amount of willingness amongst our members, who are predominantly small businesses, to be involved with colleges in terms of provision and to help feed into training programmes and so on, it is extremely difficult for them to do that. Training programmes by necessity are sort of led by pedagogical theory and so on that most business people just have no idea about. They're thinking about the tasks that their employees or their future employees are going to have to do in their business, and they're thinking, I want them to be able to do that. I want them to have this kind of attitude. They're not necessarily experts at saying this is how you go about that. That's for the people that are experts in that to do. What needs to happen is a kind of a bit of an interpretative relationship between the development of courses and the running of courses and what employer demand is. I think there's a kind of a mismatch in that we just keep misunderstanding each other, in that the experts are doing a fantastic job in developing courses, but it's the how, it's the things that I've developed in the I've mentioned in the paper that we submitted around delivering courses along shift work, or delivering courses in a way that mirrors the world of work. That kind of input can really be provided by small businesses. They can say, look, this is what we need our people to be able to do. This is the kind of world of work that you're expecting your students to go into. And that's the kind of input that you probably could get at a developmental stage from businesses.
I'm sorry if I'm misinterpreting Mr. Adams' question, but Mr. Adams' question, as I understood it, was what would the private sector contribute in terms of training, rather than saying, what you seem to be answering was what the colleges should contribute in terms of getting it right for businesses. Now, that's a legitimate question, but what I'm wondering is, and this has been, you know, this accusation has been thrown at businesses more than once, that effectively some businesses have disengaged from that training. That training is somebody else's responsibility, and they expect to take fully formed individuals, fully trained and everything else, but it should be trained at the public purse's expense, and the businesses should benefit. You seem to be, not saying that, you seem to be certainly being running close to that particular argument.
Okay, well, we've got evidence to suggest that of the people that invested in training, of our members that invested in training, around half of them in the past year, most of that was delivered by private training providers. It was paid for. But it was paid for and bought from private training providers because those private training providers could deliver exactly what the business needed, in the format the business needed, at the time the business needed. And so they paid for it. So that's... Does that not go back
to the fact that your members in particular don't engage as much with, it's easier for Amy's members and the structure of the Chamber of Commerce to engage at that level with FE, is a lot of that maybe not just the fact that they weren't aware of what they could have maybe tapped into at a local level?
Yes, it could be that. I suppose if it isn't the job of colleges to reach out and get more private sector customers providing you know, a co-investment chunk of money towards training, then, you know, there isn't a problem. So,
Mary, there was situations of good practice throughout the country, and there are some places where business and colleges have worked together to make sure that they give something that's relevant. Examples like Enrique and Paisley, just happens to be my constituency, they actually invested in a business part for renewables, and they got small businesses and taught electricians how to work in the renewable side of things as well. So it gave value to them in a new market. And that kind of thing, I'm saying, you know, there is stuff out there they can get into, but they're just not managing to get the engagement. Do you think?
I mean, I don't want to kind of like say, so I think it's very difficult for an individual small business to engage directly. They've not got the time. It's very difficult for a college to engage with all the small businesses in its kind of local area as well. There's a lot of them. It takes a lot of resource to do that. And if you're looking at putting more of your resource into frontline teaching rather than other stuff, then, you know, kind of there's a decision to be made there. It is why you have organisations like ours. I mean, you guys today invited myself and James and Mary to come and talk to you. You didn't invite, you know, kind of small businesses directly to say, why aren't you engaging with your local college and how can your college change to do it better and what can we do in the budget to make you engage with your local college more? You recognise the role of business representative organisations, and it is something that, you know, as you recognise, the Chambers do very well is bring members together with groups like, you know, kind of the further education sector. You know, kind of we do it with other government departments as well. So it's a tough nut to crack. Mary made really valid points about the way that the college sector can respond to businesses as well. But I think it's maybe not about funding in terms of the co-investment. It's maybe it is more about rethinking and a change in attitude about getting businesses involved and getting business engagement. Now, that's a change in attitude from the business sector in terms of, you know, kind of in terms of many businesses is recognising the impact that lack of engagement will have on their business in 5 or 10 years' time. You are not going to end up with a workforce locally that you need, and you're going to have to spend more money recruiting from out with your local area. You know, kind of it's about that recognition as well, which is again somewhere where an intermediary organisation like ours or one of the others has a really important role.
Can I just quickly add in response to your point, convener? From SCDI's perspective, there is many of our organisations that are members are very committed, thoroughly committed to training and to developing their workforce. An example is the oil and gas sector, which has got APITO, the Oil and Gas Academy, which is exactly set up for that very reason. And every time we have events or engagements that involve the education sector, we have a real high degree of interest and uptake in that.
Thank you. Liam?
Yeah, just very briefly, I mean, the figure did leap out of the FSB briefing about 45% engaged the private sector, provide about 4 times more than engaged with a college. I mean, I would echo what George was saying in that in Orkney, for example, the college deals not necessarily with individual businesses, but with, or indeed Chambers of Commerce or FSB, but with the construction sector, with the tourism sector, with the food and drink sector. I mean, are we not asking colleges to spread themselves even more thinly if what we're trying to get them to do is ape what individual private training providers can do on site with specific businesses? And we need to be careful that if we still want some form of campus arrangement and deal with the numbers that colleges deal with, then we can't have them trying to fill that space because it doesn't play to their strengths and it's already being met perhaps perfectly adequately by individual private training providers. Is that a fair assessment?
I'd agree with Liam that there's no point in a college trying to fill the space that a private sector training is provided. There's no point in the public sector trying to do that. If the private sector is already filling a space, there's no point in the public sector trying to do that. Is a line that we pursue in many contexts, including this one. Orkney and Renfrewshire are actually really both of them really good examples of where there is really good liaison there between colleges and local industries. So, you know, kind of that it can be done. It's not about colleges spreading themselves too thinly. It's why with the college reform process, there's both an opportunity and a concern. Regionalisation provides the opportunity to have a key focus for business liaison and industry liaison in a college. That's an opportunity. There's the concern about that maintenance of local provision in order to maintain the local relationships. So you don't want people in, the college in Orkney just having to go to, kind of industry in Orkney having to go to somebody in Inverness. You want them still to have a connection in Orkney, for example.
Move on now to Colin Beattie.
Thank you, Fiona. We've been talking around graduates' entrepreneurial and employability skills and how these can best be developed. Can I ask just a direct question? Are you satisfied as to the level of business involvement in our colleges? And is there any indications at all that it's leading to the right mix of graduate, which business would like to see?
That's inconsistent. In some areas, in some geographical areas, it's extremely good. In some industry sectors, it's extremely good. There are some colleges that have developed good partnerships with a range of companies. You've got in Fife, they're working very well with the renewable energy industry, for example, and there's very good liaison, which includes on and off-site training, and which includes, kind of discussion as to what the curriculum needs to look like. In other areas, it's not so good. It is inconsistent. I'm hoping that the move to outcome agreements for the regional colleges will drive the standard up across Scotland, both in terms of all the, kind of liaising across industries and also in all the geographical areas.
Did you have something to say?
Not on this.
Okay, sorry.
Just a specific point in terms of business engagement in college governance. That's always been a very strong area of colleges in terms of getting lots of business representatives and not representatives but business figures on their college boards, and we want to see that continue as we move into regional college boards.
A specific. I recently went to the opening of an innovation centre at Queen Margaret University, and I wondered whether you had an opinion on the development of these innovation centres and how they will contribute.
This is one of the areas in which we're very supportive. Kind of it looks like a really good policy. It's, kind of in that knowledge transfer using the activity that's going on in our universities to directly support new businesses and innovation within existing businesses is really positive, but it is one of these areas that we in the Scottish Chambers would looked at just to make sure that that we're not looking at duplication of funding, that we're not making the system more complex. So these things are very positive, but we just need to make sure we're doing them properly and we're doing the right things properly, not just doing all the right things.
Scotland's research base it is huge. Our innovations that come out of our universities are tremendous. What we need to make sure is that we maximise the economic potential of those innovations and of the things that we invent and develop in our universities. We invented, in large part, the Scottish inventions shaped the modern world. We've got to make sure that continues into the future. There's already significant business engagement in university research, but things like innovation centres, things like knowledge transfer partnerships will have the potential to further transform the engagement of business in university research in Scotland, and I think that's a really important area.
I'd just like to add one final thing on that score. There are a lot of businesses out there that could probably benefit from what these innovation centres and knowledge exchange that happens from universities outwards. Many of them do not engage. I think there is an issue of the platform, the engagement platform, if you like. And we have always advocated as the FSB that Business Gateway being the key interface between the business sector in Scotland and what the public sector can offer in terms of business support and development should be the main platform for these kinds of things. And we would want to see more integration of the offerings that Queen Margaret and other universities can offer their local businesses, delivered through that platform.
Thank you, Convener. You mentioned the outcome agreements, and the Scottish Funding Council is also moving towards outcome agreements with the universities, and has set some challenges to the universities within that. And I'd like to ask you specifically about the change in emphasis in the research base towards high quality research, very targeted on research that will deliver economic value. So just an idea about whether you think that's the right priority, and also if you could give a comment on whether we're actually fully getting the benefit of the research that's happening, and whether there has to be a better link into SMEs and through the universities to try and to turn those research developments into production and value to the economy.
Can I start with this end? Mary.
Well, a lot of our existing businesses wouldn't really find the world of research very easy to interact with. However, there is a lot of potential in terms of spin-out and enterprise and that side of things from the university itself. And I think that we could maximise that and really inject some high growth, interesting stuff coming out of our universities into a business idea that actually makes money and really supports our economy in Scotland. So that's probably where I would go.
Thanks. Business engagement in R&D in Scotland, I think, has historically underperformed that across the rest of the UK, and we want to see that improved. As I said a moment ago, the research innovation hubs and centres are crucial in making that happen, in bringing the research that's coming out of our universities and making it accessible to Scottish businesses. There's a huge amount of work being done by the university sector already. There's new websites that have been launched, and these are absolutely to be welcomed, because we have the potential, I'm convinced, in our universities to the inventions and innovations that we have there can shape the future of the world, and we've got to be at the forefront of that.
In terms of the targeted research, I think that very much universities are funded from several sources. They can fund their research from several sources. The Scottish Government's overriding priority is sustainable economic growth. Therefore, if it's funding universities to do research, then having that research fulfill its overarching priority seems very logical. In terms of benefiting from it, there are a lot of good things going on, as others have mentioned. The one concern I would raise is that there was a stated aim to create a single knowledge exchange office, and the shape that this is going to take, and it's going to be virtual and things, there's still discussions going on around this. My concern would be that the smaller businesses in Scotland aren't involved in this, while a lot of research and innovation, a lot of innovation does go on in our larger businesses, and because they have the resource to do it. That's not a lot of the Scottish business base. And so if we want the Scottish economy and Scottish businesses to benefit from the research that's going on in our universities, there needs to be a greater acceptance of the need to work with smaller businesses in order to enable them to take the opportunities that are offered by Scotland's excellent research, Scotland's universities' excellent research outcomes.
Supplementary, obviously, the Scottish Funding Council is supporting a voucher scheme for small businesses, which can provide funding up to £5,000. With a commitment from the small businesses to commit, obviously, their staff time and a matching value of cash. Do you see that as being a sustainable way forward with small businesses, or have you any comment about that scheme at all?
Keeping an eye on it.
We're positive about it. Let's see how it progresses.
Great. Thank you very much, Joan Calping.
Just a very quick supplementary on the research aspect of things. The SCDI is very clear that the university sector contribute 12.4% of the UK's research, which is punching well above our weight. But I was alarmed to read that of your concerns about the Westminster government's tightening international student immigration system and the effect that that could have and the damaging effect that it could have in Scotland's universities and obviously that research engine for the economy. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, thanks for raising that. I think in terms of university funding, we're very happy with the settlement universities have got. I'm sure universities themselves are very happy with it. Our biggest source of concern for universities in Scotland is the tightening up of student visas, and this not only affects universities, actually incidentally also affects colleges, but really could have a significant impact on universities. The international student market is worth millions of pounds to the Scottish economy, not just in terms of the fees that are paid to universities, but the benefit that they bring to the wider economy from living over here. The benefits socially to Scotland are huge. If we've got people that have received a Scottish education in senior positions in companies or public organisations across the world, that can only make Scotland look better on the international stage. And also having that diverse mix of students studying together, interacting on campus, can only be a good thing for Scotland's universities. The tightening of student visas is therefore, from SCDI's perspective, a huge challenge to universities, socially, financially, and to Scotland economically. And we would like to see the Scottish Government doing all it can to work with the UK Government to change or reduce the impact of visa restrictions or proposed visa restrictions on international students studying in Scotland.
Have you approached the UK Government yourself to raise your concerns? You have? Yeah.
We regularly engage with the UK Government and the Migration Advisory Committee, which consult and is contracted to provide advice to the Government. All our engagements with the Migration Advisory Committee have reflected our strong concerns about student visas.
Have you been satisfied with the response that you've got from the UK Government?
Not at this stage.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I take you back briefly to the issue of colleges? We touched on regionalisation and mergers at various points in the evidence this morning. I think it's been recognised that there perhaps are opportunities for efficiencies and creating perhaps a less confused landscape. However, you've also, I think, referred to potential geographic barriers and the need to constantly be responsive to the local needs of businesses in a particular local area. Can you perhaps say what the experience is within the business community of their engagement within the process of regionalisation, whether either individual businesses, sector bodies or business organisations have been involved in decisions around how regionalisation or merger ought to work? And perhaps one for you specifically, James, in terms of business figures on college boards, you referred to that earlier as being a strength. However, presumably the wider your regional board is stretched, perhaps the less relevant the position of a single business figure or business figures are to different parts of that regional economy that can vary quite extensively.
Yeah, happy to go first. I think in terms of the business bodies on boards, don't underestimate the perspective that a business figure, business leader that may not even be of a business that's relevant to some of the other businesses a college is engaging with, but the impact that individual can have in the governance and the decision making of a college or regional college board is huge, and we really must value that input of businesses. And I know that colleges historically have valued that input. And I suppose what's important is, well, for one thing, we've got some in regional areas that now reflect the college boundaries. There are some huge businesses that have a major economic impact on a local area, and regional college boards are now in a position to be able to engage with those businesses really effectively, I think. But also engaging those as employers and also as business leaders onto college boards is really important and should definitely form part of the new regional college boards.
I mean, I accept what you say about the input they can have, but in a sense, if you're of a business that has no real locus, you're in a sector that isn't necessarily particularly important to an area. I mean, I think of my own in Orkney. It's very distinct from the regional economy in and around the travel to work area in Inverness. Then your credibility as a business person is beyond question. But your connection to the local economy within Orkney, within the Western Isles, within Shetland, it may be less obvious to those looking to you to represent those business interests at a board level.
Offer something here. The FSB has been far less concerned with the actual structures in place and the sort of governance procedures and so on in this process than the coverage issues. And I think the key thing for any board, regardless of who sits on it, is the right information. And local labour market information is important. And if you know your market in terms of your private sector that's in different places, then you can hopefully communicate with that market, understand what it is that they need, and then provide something along those lines. I think it's less important. It's important that you get some business input, that you get the business perspective, the private sector perspective on things. But it's less important exactly who that is on a board, so long as you have the right information that you're making decisions on. You know, I accept that, you know, loud voices often get the most attention, but the important thing about regionalisation is using the labour market information.
And in terms of the process itself, I mean, the committee's dealt with a number of statutory instruments that are, I suppose, the manifestation of this merger process being taken forward. Has there been, in your view, enough involvement of business groups, individual businesses, sector bodies in the process of which colleges come together and how they come together and what they'll deliver?
My perspective would be that it depends where you are, and you could tell several different stories for each of the different regions about that. The Scottish Government have consulted, and to their credit have kept consulting with organisations like ourselves. I think going down to a regional level, it has been more variable. We have the Glasgow Economic Partnership, for example, extremely good relations between the colleges, the council, the Chamber of Commerce there, other groups involved there, 2014 as well, actually, because that's meant to have a long-term impact there. You know, so somewhere like that, it's worked very well. In other areas, it hasn't maybe worked as well. There are some areas like West Lothian and Dumfries where the relationship's hardly changed because it's a single college area. They only ever had that college anyway. So it has been different. The Highlands is obviously, as ever, due to, you know, kind of has particular geographical concerns that mean that you need a different approach, maybe. So I do think it depends. Going back to your question, if I may, though, as well, about business leaders on board, I think that engagement needs to take place at every level, not just board level for a college. And that also solves the issue of the concern that I would have, and I think that my colleagues here would have as well, about making sure that you're not just asking, you know, you're not just liaising with business in terms of one person who runs a very large business, but that you're responding to the whole of that business base in your geographical area. Everywhere in Scotland, every area in Scotland, that includes a significant proportion of smaller businesses, and how you work with them and how you make sure you're liaising with them is something that needs to be thought about. You can't just involve, you know, kind of like one or two people who happen to employ a lot of people, important as they are. You've got to do the rest of the job as well.
Can I thank the witnesses this morning? That's the end of the questions we wanted to raise with you. But can I thank you for coming along this morning and giving us your expertise. Can I briefly suspend so we can change panels? Thank you. Welcome back, and can I welcome our second panel this morning, who will provide the view of funding and representative bodies on the issue of the budget. Can I welcome Mark Batho, Chief Executive of the Scottish Funding Council, Katie Hutton, Head of National Training Programme Policy and Integration, and Danny Logue, Director of Operations from Skills Development Scotland, Liz McIntyre, Principal of Borders College, Scotland's Colleges, and Alistair Sim, Director, Universities Scotland. Can I welcome all of you to the committee this morning, and can I kick off right away with Neil Bibby.
Thanks, Convener. We're obviously here to scrutinise what the draft budget will mean in terms of service delivery. Can I ask you, what you'd understand to be the cut in the college's budget, or the budget for colleges next year? What will the impact be on the teaching grant, and what the impact will be on courses, student numbers and jobs?
Who wishes to start?
Shall I start?
Yes, Mark, thank you.
From the Funding Council. First of all, thank you for the invite to appear today. Working from the Funding Council's perspective, we're looking at academic years rather than financial years, which of course confuses matters. But our starting point is always the baseline budgets. And what we have seen in the publication of this budget is an increase of 17 million over the previously published baseline for 13-14 financial year of 17 million. When we do our academic year assessment, we also have to take account of the figure for financial year 2014-15, which is a lower figure. And so what we've seen is, shall we say, a lessening of the slope going down for 13-14, but I couldn't actually put a figure on what the final outcome in comparison with academic year 12-13 would be at the moment, because we are still awaiting clarification from the Scottish Government on a number of areas of the budget. We get a guidance letter from the Scottish Government which allows us to proceed. We're expecting that soon. But from our perspective, as things stand, we have an increase on what we were expecting from baselines of 17 million in the financial year 13-14. The impact of that on teaching and on colleges generally, the Cabinet Secretary was actually addressing Scotland's colleges yesterday, and he was saying that he expected the funding available to be sufficient to allow colleges to deliver no decrease in the amount of teaching that they were doing, and to fulfil also the government's ambitions around employability and restructuring. Where we sit in the Funding Council is that, given where we are and awaiting further information, nevertheless, our assessment coincides with that of the Cabinet Secretary, that we believe that the budgets going forward do allow us to provide funding at a level which will allow the fulfilment of those ambitions.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just absorbing that information for a moment. I think, as Mark has said, the actual impact in terms of how much money is available is difficult to get to a figure. For the purposes of the submission, Scotland's colleges made some assumptions. We accept they may be incorrect. There appears to us to be around about £6.6 million less available in the budget for teaching. We believe that there may be a possibility, perhaps Mark can comment on this, that some of the money that was brought forward from future years may be clawed back by the Funding Council. So we believe there's a potential for around about £10.6 million less available for teaching for 13-14 than in the current year. But if Mark has other figures, that would be fine.
And it was raised last week, and I'm sure Neil would want to ask this, but I'll ask it on his behalf. Mark, is there any possibility you can clarify this? Because we had last week the possibility of clawback and some confusion around this. Is that, can you clarify that?
Sorry, I mean, this gets into horrible complexities around resolution of financial year and academic year. What we actually did was brought forward resource, because we fund on academic years but get our funding in on financial years. We brought forward, when we got the funding for financial year 12-13, we applied an additional amount of that funding into academic year 12-13 beyond what we would otherwise have done. In other words, we've pushed the money into the colleges earlier than we would otherwise have done. And specifically, that was done to begin the process of actually adjusting budgets according to regional need. That was a very specific purpose for that. So the money is not clawed back, as it were. It's just that it has already gone to the colleges rather than being available to go to the colleges in the current academic year. So, I mean, it depends which end of the telescope you look at it, but actually we would say that the resource from financial year 12-13 went to the colleges early, would be our presentation of that.
Just clarify from
yeah, sorry,
I
I did warn you.
Are you saying that it was spent in the financial year that it was, it was awarded for,
yes,
but not effectively brought forward in terms of academic year?
Yes.
Is that actually a short summary of what you're saying?
Yes.
So therefore, the money was spent in the correct financial year.
Yes.
Not correct's the wrong word, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
But it's just, okay. Sorry. Neil.
Just to clarify that, what was or what is the core teaching grant for 2012-13 in terms of academic year and financial year?
What I could talk about is the overall allocation to colleges for 12-13. Now, we fund by academic year, as I say, rather than by financial year. The financial year is as set out in the budget statement, which is for 13-14 a sum of £511.7 million available going to colleges overall. What we haven't done yet is allocate that to colleges because, as I say, we're waiting for further information from the government in terms of the guidance letter that we're expecting imminently. So we haven't actually done an assessment of what will be granted to colleges from the Funding Council. That process will take place over the coming period, leading to the agreement of outcome agreements at around the turn of the calendar year, and attached to those outcome agreements at a regional level will be a budget for each of the colleges. Now that budget is made up, and sorry to bring in complexity again, but that is made up of a proportion of the 13-14 financial year budget and a proportion of our current understanding of the 14-15 financial year budget. So we have to make assumptions around that, and the only assumption that we can make at the moment is that that figure will remain as it is in the baseline following the spending review.
Can I ask what are you waiting for clarification from the Scottish Government on?
Well, there's a whole range of things that we get in the guidance letter in terms of what they require the resource to be spent on. I mean, our budget is made up of a range of things. We have some strategic funding that we set aside for overall purposes. There is the core funding that will be going out to colleges. There's also, and this is something that the committee may want to be discussing, going to be a continuation of the scheme that is funded through Skills Development Scotland going forward. And we're awaiting details of the nature of that scheme at the moment. So those are all issues around why we're not in a position, on the basis of the published figures that came through the budget, to finalise what an academic year budget would be at the moment.
Liz, I know I interrupted you earlier, but just think it was helpful to try and get some clarification around that point. Do you want to continue?
I think, you know, therein lies the rub. That is the issue for us as colleges trying to plan provision for next year, that we don't yet have clarity on what those budgets might be, and we could spend a significant amount of time debating the resources. I think the important thing from the college's perspective is that it's even less money than before, and it comes on the heels of significant cuts in previous years. So where we would have been looking perhaps over-optimistically for a reversal of the trend, obviously that hasn't happened. There is still a cut. It's a cut on top of cuts, and it was likely to have a similar impact to cuts in previous years.
Can I ask, just a general point? I mean, we heard last week of concerns about a biscuit tin approach to funding and the complexities we're hearing in financial year, academic year, money being brought forward, different pots of money. Do you think the system of funding colleges or the services they provide could be made easier? What improvements do you think could be made to the way that the funding is, and make it easier to kind of scrutinise and see what the issues are?
I think it could obviously be made simpler. I think that is also the view of the Scottish Government. I think the Scottish Government are aiming to make it simpler. I think we're in a period of transition in which I think actually things have got more confusing in the short term than they were previously, but we understand that there's an aim to simplify it. I think one of the important things for us to consider during this period of different sources of funding is that the different sources of funding are targeted in a different way, and they are for different purposes. And if you'll allow me, I will use the College Learning Programme funding, which is the SDS funding, as an example. The funding that has been allocated to that money does not fund traditional core college places. It funds short-term employability programmes. And I think the difficulty that we have at the moment is we're not quite sure whether there is a significant demand for those types of programmes when faced with not being able to access a college programme. I'll give you just a little example. If, for example, you're a young woman within the 16 to 24 age gap, you've left school, you want to be a nurse. You've left school perhaps with one hire. You want actually to go to your local college to undertake an access to nursing programme. But the access to nursing programme at your local college is full. There are not sufficient places there for you to access a place. Instead, you're being offered the opportunity to undertake a Skills Development Scotland college learning programme which has 192 hours of tuition and a work experience placement. It's an opportunity, so we can rightly say to this young person, there is an opportunity there for you, but it's not necessarily the right opportunity in the right place at the right time for that person. I just think we need to understand that it's not college funding as we have traditionally known it. It's different types of funding for different purposes.
Can I just come back on the simplification point, Chair, Convener, just for a minute? First of all, to say I think we are very well aware of the need of colleges to have certainty about their budgets, and we are committed in the Funding Council actually to getting those budgets out to colleges at the very at the very end of this year or at the very start of next year, as colleges begin gearing up on their recruitment processes and the like. And so that's going to be a significant effort to achieve that. In terms of the overall simplification of the methodology, yes, we've been charged by the government with doing that. There is a working group at the moment involving Scotland's colleges and ourselves that is looking precisely at getting greater simplicity, because, I mean, we appreciate the concerns of the biscuit tin. Much of the biscuit tin is not actually Funding Council biscuit tins, I would say, but nevertheless, I think it does need a helicopter view, if you like, of the position from colleges, and I think that everyone is committed actually to trying to get that greater clarification rather than people turning to about 5 different pots for similar kinds of things.
SDS Neil, at this point. I think the example that was given clearly indicated at least a question mark over it. I just wondered if STS wanted to respond to that.
The idea of the new college learning provision, when the government first asked us to run it, was that it would not be necessarily the same type of provision. There were principles underpinning that we outlined in the contracting strategy. First, that it would be a commissioning process, so we would seek bids from colleges to deliver that provision. Also, that it would be a shift away from looking at measures such as participation measures, how many people were involved in courses, towards retention and achieving outcomes. We'd also, the nature of the provision itself was, as Liz has said, would be geared towards employability, but also offer some vocational training and a mandatory working experience element, which we know from research is highly valued from individuals in terms of their experience, in terms of learning and their ability to demonstrate their employability skills, but also by employers. The other side of that also was that it would be connected to local supply and demand. So we asked colleges in the bidding process to speak to the local community planning partners to identify as much as possible about what the needs of the local economy were. And also, again, in terms of tracking, the system that we're using, it's called the Corporate Training System for the new College Learning Programme, allows us very quickly to give reports in terms of who is participating and what the outcomes are. So it wasn't necessarily seen as being the same provision. These were the principles that were underpinning it.
Just ask the learning programme that's going to continue next year.
The Cabinet Secretary actually at Scotland's Colleges yesterday indicated that that would be the case. Sorry, I was there, so I can say that. And he indicated that around 24 million would be ring-fenced for colleges, and that colleges could bid into the rest of the employability fund.
Does that mean the same number of W-sum equivalents that are provided this year will be provided next year? 24 million?
All I've got is the figure at the moment. I haven't got any details around that, and in the end it's not a funding council scheme. I was merely a witness to what was addressed to the colleges yesterday.
Sorry, can I just clarify something now? The 24 million that you are referring to is part of what? Is that additional funding to the money you mentioned earlier, or is it?
That's all I've got is what I heard yesterday, which is that there will be 24 million ring-fenced to the colleges out of an employability fund of 50 million. I haven't got any other details.
So it's part of the employability fund, 50 million. So that is different, I think. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Liam McCarthy.
Will we wade into this more confusing it sounds, but I mean I appreciate some of the uncertainty and the reasons behind that, but in a sense we've heard second hand the Cabinet Secretary's confidence in the deliverability of the range of commitments, and Mark, you said the Funding Council shares that, and yet we still don't have a picture on the extent or the nature of the cuts and where they will fall. So I'm struggling to see how necessarily that confidence can be expressed, and certainly be interested in Lizzie's view as to whether or not Scottish colleges share that confidence, particularly in relation to things like compulsory redundancies, which was an issue that popped up during evidence last year, and ministers have reiterated that, or John Swinney reiterated it in presentation of the budget, but certainly the view last year was that we were already seeing compulsory redundancies, so the policy, in a sense, is already not being adhered to, or it's not possible to adhere to. So, as I said, I'd welcome the rationale for the confidence that's been expressed when we don't have a clear picture of what's going on, and a view of the Scottish colleges as to whether or not they share that confidence, or where they think the real pressures are likely to fall.
Right. Shall I start? Sorry, in terms of where our confidence lies, we have significant evidence that the programme of restructuring of colleges, regionalisation, can and is delivering really quite significant savings across the piece. For example, the City of Glasgow College, which is now up and running, has indicated that the savings from its merger are of the order of £6 million a year. in its business case, the Edinburgh College, which was launched yesterday, actually that was its vesting date, was projecting £9 million of savings as a direct result of the restructuring. And the Cabinet Secretary has made clear to us that he expects those savings to be recycled into the maintenance of places and the delivery of the government's opportunities for all objectives. That scale of funding projected across all the activity that's taking place with regionalisation at the moment, we are clear that there is sufficient resource within the system and to spare if our projections are right. In other words, we're not playing this very tight at the moment, and this allows me to have made the statement that I did at the start, that we're very clear that there will be sufficient resource in academic year 13-14 to deliver the amount of teaching that the government is seeking, which is a maintenance of the amount of teaching in academic year 12-13, and its other objectives. And given that, we will be going into the negotiation of outcome agreements with the regions and regional colleges over the coming couple of months with those objectives in view.
Indicated that they don't dispute the savings that are made, but I mean, my understanding is that a lot of them would dispute the time frame by which those actually can be realised, and then, as you say, ploughed back into teaching provision and the maintenance of the other commitments.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We don't dispute that there are savings to be made, and I think last year we were quite clear that we thought the regionalisation agenda would force efficiencies through the sector and that savings would be made, but we're here today to talk about the 13-14 settlement, and I think there's we know what the figure is, so there's no sense that there's an additional 20 million coming from, you know, the results of two mergers back into the system. So I think it will take a bit of time to come through. As to the Cabinet Secretary's remarks yesterday, I obviously I wouldn't want to quote what the Cabinet Secretary said. What I thought I heard was that the Cabinet Secretary was confident that there was sufficient resource to meet the Scottish Government's ambitions. That's not necessarily to say that those ambitions would match the aspirations of individuals or the requirements of businesses, as we heard in the earlier evidence session. We don't know that. Obviously, it's for every government to choose what they prioritise. But I think the current level of cuts for next year is still going to have an impact on colleges, on student places, and potentially on jobs.
To go back to Liz's earlier evidence, when you seem to question the 16 to 19-year-old opportunities for all focus on employability as not meeting the needs as you perceived of all your potential students. When you gave evidence last year, you said that the priority had to be the people who are furthest to reach from education. You were concerned that they would suffer more. And certainly that was what the evidence session earlier today from business talked about, the hardest to reach, which is exactly what Opportunities for All is intended to do. So I just wondered why there was that change in your approach from last year to this year.
There's not a change in my approach. I think that the college learning programme absolutely has its place, and I think there are young people who will undoubtedly benefit from that programme, but it is a short, sharp intervention around employability. The core business that colleges do for young people, and I believe that we do this well, is to combine employability skills with significant vocational qualifications. And our experience is that employers are looking for a combination of both of those things. So they want someone who has perhaps achieved an SVQ level 2 in catering to work in their kitchen. They want someone who has got a City and Guilds qualification in joinery to join their construction business. They want those people also perhaps to have a certificate of work readiness. I'm absolutely 100% supportive of that concept. The problem that we have at the moment is the current format of the college learning programme is around employability skills but without the substantive qualification. And I believe that a model that combined the substantive qualification with the employability skills would ultimately be a better model. Because we've had cuts in college funding, it's now a choice. Really, you can have one or the other, but it's actually quite hard to find both.
But last year in your evidence, you were very specific about the fact that you're concerned that there wouldn't be enough employability courses and there wouldn't be enough opportunities for all places. And that doesn't seem to be your concern now. Your concern is that you've got them, but you're not happy with them.
My concern is that it's difficult for individuals to match themselves and their individual aspirations to the programmes that are available. Perhaps I'm over optimistic and perhaps I'm naive, but that I would like people to be able to have the opportunity that best suits them, and that is still not actually the case. They can have an opportunity. It may be a holding position for some people. Some people may undertake a college learning programme because there isn't a college place available for them this year, in the hopes that there will be one available for them next year, or they may be in a holding pattern in one of those programmes in the hopes that a modern apprenticeship will be available for them next year. I would like to see a system which was able to balance out the opportunities available with the aspirations of the young people, but perhaps that's just over-optimistic.
You raised the issue of modern apprenticeships. I know that Skills, the SCDI, who gave evidence, written and oral evidence earlier, praised the number of modern apprenticeships and has been vastly expanded. I take it you would welcome that.
I absolutely welcome that. I think the challenge that we all have around modern apprenticeships still is getting employers on board and having employers who have the capacity to employ apprentices. I am a great supporter of pre-apprenticeship schemes which get people ready to move into apprenticeships, but I do believe that these have to be quite substantial schemes, and I'm not sure that the college learning programme as it's currently structured enables that amount of development to happen either.
Yeah, but there's absolutely no question that the modern apprenticeship programme is on target. Just like the 16 to 19-year-old opportunities for all is on target, and that was your concern last year. But that's now been satisfied, and you're going to have those places, and the places for modern apprenticeships are on track as well.
Yeah, there's a significant increase in the number of places available. I think we have to understand what we mean by a place, and that's simply my point, is that the places are not all of the same. A college, a funding council funded college place for a substantive qualification is not the same as a place on a college learning programme. They are significantly different with significantly different outcomes. And that's, I only trying to serve to make that point, that when we talk about places, if we conflate all of those different things, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone, because from an individual student's perspective, they might have wanted a college place which they couldn't access because there were insufficient college places available.
But you would agree that
Short question.
Right. You would agree that the opportunities for all does target the hardest to reach?
I think the opportunities for all provides opportunities for people. I think it's far too early to say whether those are always the right opportunities in the right place at the right time for the individuals concerned.
Thank you very much. Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Convener. In the evidence from Scotland's colleges, you've mentioned an 80,000 drop in the number of students in Scotland's colleges since 2008-9, and you expect that trend to continue. What I would like to know, and I think that was expressed by the previous panel as well, is some more information on that 80,000 figure. I don't know if you're able to comment on what the profile of that was in terms of part-time, full-time, the age range of that 80,000, perhaps the social demographics of that 80,000, or the type of course that's perhaps been particularly affected by that 80,000 drop?
I don't have detailed evidence of the breakdown of the numbers. What I can give you, if you would like, is a kind of a feel for what's going on, just from my own perspective. I think there's a combination of issues there, and I think both were picked up in the earlier evidence session. The first is that for a number of years now, we have been urged through ministerial guidance letters to prioritise full-time provision, to prioritise provision to young people, and that has meant a movement of the resource away from part-time learning for older people and into that younger age group. And I think everybody has attempted to follow that guidance as best they can. I think the other side of it is that there is definitely a decline in demand from individuals for part-time learning, which is as a result, I think, of economic constraints. People have less money available to undertake the type of training that they might have done previously. And I think changes to individual learning accounts also has an impact on that.
As the focus has moved towards young people, how do you think that's going to affect those in the other age ranges who perhaps are want to upskill at a time of being out of work, and how will that affect the economic recovery as we move hopefully towards an upturn in those people who would like to upskill?
I think it will have a significant impact on those people. I think some of it's hidden actually in terms of individuals who may be employed in a job that doesn't give them the opportunity to improve their skills or to increase their earning power, who might have been able to access training which would move them up into a higher level of employment, and they're just not able to undertake that, so they just kind of stay where they are. So they don't appear on unemployment statistics, they don't really kind of appear anywhere, but I think that potentially has an impact in skills utilisation for employers. I thought it was very interesting in the earlier debate, the discussion around the relative balance between private and public contribution to private sector training. Our experience of engaging with businesses is that it's an awful lot easier to engage with them when you have some public funding to bring to the table. The removal of the ability to bring those subsidies and the expectation that the private sector will contribute 100% of the cost of training is actually making it much more difficult, and employers are not able to meet all of those costs themselves.
Sorry, George. Mark, did you want to make a
I was just
contribution?
wanting to chip in one extra factor around this fall in actual student numbers in headcount, which is that from about 2008 onwards, we have been strongly encouraging, in fact, we have required colleges to get out of very short-term, low educational added value but high headcount courses. There were a lot of those going on that were funded by us. And so actually, if you look at pure headcount figures, if you'd got, for example, a course that lasted 10 hours with a large number of people going through it that was of low educational value, and that resource has now been translated into longer-term courses with proper accredited qualifications and the like. There is value to be had there, but the headcount figure has taken a significant hit as a result of that.
Follow up on that, okay, Mark.
Follow up on that. If that early instruction had been given, do you expect that you won't see the same reduction in student numbers then that we've seen in previous years? I mean, we have from 2008, 9 and 9, 10, so you're saying that you wouldn't expect to see that same reduction in overall numbers then?
I expect that to be a one-off, or not quite a one-off, but spread over 2 or 3 years, having a significant impact. That will diminish in terms of numbers. What I can't predict is where the student market is going to go in terms of demand for full-time courses as opposed to part-time courses over the next couple of years. But these things go in cycles. As the economic cycle changes, so I suspect the demand for full-time as opposed to part-time will change as well. But that very specific element will have had a one-off impact on the figures on that 80,000.
George Adam.
Yes, it's a question for Liz McIntyre. On your headcount figures in Table 5, student numbers, you've got 2008, 2009, the number figure is 384,986. That's an accurate figure?
As far as I'm aware, that's an accurate figure.
Okay, because well, obviously all the numbers are based on these figures, and being pedantic and rather having a quiet weekend, I checked the figures, and it's actually 374,986. So effectively, that's an extra 10,000 students then that aren't actually included in that 80,000 figure you're talking about then.
I'm sorry, I really can't answer that. As far as I'm aware, the figures were extracted from the SFC performance indicators. If there's been a typing error or something, I'm
I
not
can
aware
assure
of it.
the figures, the 3.7 figure is
Well, I would
correct.
have to, agree with you. I don't know.
Okay, so that
Can't
kind
comment
of
on that.
changes the kind of outlook on the actual paper itself. But on other things as well, one of the professors, I forget which one it was the one in the middle last week, he actually... he was...
You get so many.
It was so interesting. But he actually talked about 16 to 19-year-olds, those 31,000 effectively, who could end up champing at the doors of the colleges trying to get in. Now, could there not be an argument made, because he also was making the argument for older people would end up, some of them would fall off at the other end. Could there not be an argument made that in a kind of generational shift, that because of this opportunities for all at this stage, these 31,000, a lot of these young people will be people that would have possibly come engaged with colleges at a later date. We're just getting them at an earlier time in their life and giving them an opportunity to really build something for the future. Could that argument be made?
I think that argument could be made. I mean, it's part of the early intervention approach, I suppose, and preventative spending. Yes, the more money we spend, ensuring that people who are 16 to 19 right now have the opportunity to gain the skills that they need, then that will should eventually feed through in the same way that what we do with 3-year-olds will eventually feed through into the system. But for the current time, there are people out there still in the economy, not contributing, people in workforces who could gain additional skills now. I understand the difficulties of prioritising in times of scarce resources, but yes, it's preventative spend, it's early intervention.
Before I bring in Claire Adams, can I thank George Adams for saving
official records.
10,000 places there on the college course. Yeah, can we have that clarified though? If that is an SFC figure, if is that where it comes from? Right. It's 374 rather than 384.
Right. Well, it's a Scotland's Colleges figure, but they were using our data, so we will collectively
between
work
you,
on
could you
that.
just confirm to the committee in writing afterwards the correct figure, so we're absolutely clear?
Yes.
Because that's a substantial difference between 80 and 70. Notwithstanding the comments and the evidence from Mr Bath a moment ago about what that represented. Claire Adamson.
Mira, I'd really like to ask about Skills Development Scotland's evidence on the new college learning programme, but before I do that, maybe I should have come in at the time. You mentioned a figure of 24 million as being given by the Cabinet Secretary yesterday, but the evidence we have is that the funding this year is for 13.1 million. So was that a direct comparator with that figure, or was that 24 million including other training programmes?
I must present myself merely as a rapporteur from the event yesterday, so I really can't go into any detail. But he did make it clear that there would be around 24 million of resource for the Employability Fund that would be ring-fenced to the colleges, and that's where the Funding Council interest comes in, that it would be ring-fenced to the colleges.
Okay. If we could just ask some specific questions about the evidence from Skills Development Scotland. In terms of the new college learning programme, you've actually said in your evidence that the programme links directly to further study opportunities in college, which would not be concurrent with the evidence that's just been given by Liz in terms of meeting the aspirations of students. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
What that directly relates to is one of the outcomes that we pay for. As I say, we pay for retention of students and also outcomes at the end of it. One of the outcomes that's paid for is progression to a more advanced form of learning within the college setting.
So the assessment of this programme is going to be really on destination rather than just completing the training programme.
Yeah, we're looking at all aspects of it. It's not just how many people are participating, but we're looking at how many people have stayed during the course of the programme. We set a minimum hours of 192 taught learning hours and 192 hours work experience as a guide for colleges at the start of this programme. But that was a minimum. Some colleges are doing more than that. But the idea behind it was that we would look at all aspects because it was about retention and actually where people progress to as a result of participation.
Okay. And just finally, in terms of the the current implementation of it, obviously it's been quite a new programme. It's been delivered by Skills Development Scotland, not through the Funding Council. There's all sorts of relationship issues there with the colleges. So you also say that you were looking for a sort of buddy system with colleges. So I just wanted an idea of how this is progressing now, how many sign-ups have you had, and how many colleges are actually participating?
There's only about 5 or 6 colleges that didn't contract with SDS for the other national training programmes. So the idea behind that was those that did have experience could work together on that. We've invested quite a lot of time in working with, through the Offices of Scotland's Colleges, a work-based learning forum of colleges there who have helped us with all sorts of things to do with making sure that the paperwork, you know, that we're not duplicating paperwork really, that we're using as much as possible in terms of using the attendance records format that the colleges have got at the moment, using the individual learning plans for individuals as well on that. And we've had a number of sessions with colleges. The last one I think was just a few weeks ago, and I think that's gone really well in time as an exchange of information for us to learn from the process as we go forward.
George Adam.
Yes, I would just like to ask, obviously we've got the outcome agreements for the colleges coming up, and I just wonder how you think the allocations have shaped the outcome agreements.
We are early in the process of agreeing outcome agreements with the Funding Council for 13-14, and as we don't yet know what the allocation is going to be, I think it's a bit early to say. I think we are encouraged by the fact that the outcome agreement process enables us to enter into a meaningful dialogue with the Funding Council around allocations and around expectations, and also around distribution and balance of allocation between different age groups. So there will be a significant increase in the level of debate around how the money is applied, which I think can only be beneficial.
I'd agree 100% with that. I think it was a very useful exercise in 12-13, but it was almost chasing after the cart because colleges needed to know what their allocations were early in the year, and that's really when the firing gun, the starting gun was fired for outcome agreements. So we've learnt a lot in the first year. We've actually got a very good articulation from colleges, and I have to say from universities as well, of the deliverables that are going to come through Funding Council funding as a result of them, but we will get things much better into sequence in this year in terms of being able to negotiate the outcome agreements in advance of the allocation of resource.
MacArthur.
Yeah, for clarification, will the outcome agreements go into the level of detail in relation to the amount of teaching time that is required? Will it also specify whether or not compulsory redundancies are off the table? I mean, is it down to that sort of detail, do you expect?
It won't go into the detail of whether compulsory redundancies are off the table, because that's not a matter for the Funding Council, ultimately dealing with autonomous bodies that are possibly not in the public sector, but it will be articulating the expectations of restructuring in the colleges at that sort of level. But going down to the level of detail of staff numbers, we certainly wouldn't get involved. That is properly a matter for the regional board of the particular colleges, or the regional board in multi-region colleges, to determine with the colleges in their region.
But I mean, of course, the Minister's made it very clear that this is the stated position of the government, and I appreciate the independent status of colleges in all this. But there is a risk that, at the very least, there's a degree of confusion around what this commitment means in terms of what is going to happen at a regional level and at an individual college level.
I mean, all I'm saying is I think the government has made very clear its position on compulsory redundancies in dialogue with the colleges. That's out with the outcome agreement process, which is about direct relationship with the funding from the Funding Council and what will be delivered as a result of that funding.
Is there anything to stop you having a no compulsory redundancy as part of the outcome agreements?
I don't think that would be within our powers as a Funding Council to insist that colleges whom we fund should follow that policy. I don't think we have legal powers to insist on that, but the government has made very clear its position in direct engagement with the colleges.
I know Mr Sim's been waiting very patiently, but just a couple of very quick questions for myself before we bring you in, Alistair. I mean, I just wondered, I mean, just from my own peace of mind more than anything else, but could you just clarify the precise role, Liz, sorry, the precise role that colleges will have in delivering the opportunity for all guarantee?
I think there seems to be a broad understanding that it's not the responsibility of colleges alone within any region to deliver this guarantee, and I think it's really important that we work in partnership, which I think we are doing very well. We're working in partnership well with particularly Skills Development Scotland, but also we have to work with the education departments of local authorities, because clearly a significant number of young people stay on at school beyond 16, and that has to be taken into account. It's very much a partnership focus. We can only deliver the element of the guarantee that we are funded to deliver. One of the things that comes out of the outcome agreement is a debate around what proportion of funding is allocated to that particular age group. In our current, I'm quite happy to share this example with you, in our current outcome agreement, we already allocate 83% of our funding to that age group. Now, I will be resisting attempts from the Funding Council to push that much higher, because I'm not yet aware of what that figure is for other colleges in the country. I think 17% is not very much left to try to do everything else for everyone else. So I think we are still, as colleges, trying to meet the needs of a broad range of people, and we have to try to get a balance. And I think Skills Development Scotland and the local authorities have a role to play in that guarantee as well.
The second question was on the allocations. It follows on from George Adams' question. The budgetary allocations, and I'm just wondering, are they contingent upon colleges delivering the Scottish Government's priorities? Is there a direct link?
Yes, there is. That this is public funding going to colleges, and the outcome agreements will be framed in a context of asking colleges to deliver what the Scottish Government's priorities are. Now, that's not an exclusive list saying you will only do that, but it is saying to Borders College, for example, in exchange for the funding you get, we expect the following, and the following will have a direct link to the government's own priorities as stated. Yeah.
That's very clear. Thank you very much. Liz Smith.
Matthew, I'm sorry to pursue you in your reporter's role from yesterday, but can I just go back to this £24 million, which is obviously a significant total, and you implied that if, as you heard correctly yesterday, that it was to be ring-fenced from colleges, obviously the Scottish Funding Council would have a role in that.
No, I didn't say, sorry, if I can just interrupt. I didn't say we'd have a role. Of course, we have an interest, because we have an overarching interest in colleges. And therefore resources going into colleges do have to interface with the resources that we put into colleges, which brings in our interest, but not a role.
Right, well, let me substitute the word interest in terms of what you might decide to do in terms of your funding allocations. Do you think that £24 million, obviously, as I say, quite a significant amount, if that is to be ring-fenced for colleges, do you think that will have any impact on the way that you negotiate outcome agreements with the colleges?
I think it probably will, because we need to take account of the overall delivery by colleges of the government's objectives, and obviously 24 million ring-fenced going in there is going to have an impact. We will need to liaise closely with Skills Development Scotland to make sure we're not doing any kind of bureaucratic double counting of this, to make sure that actually at the level of being able to see overall what the college sector is doing, with that resource coming in from SDS and the resource that we're doing, that the outcomes are being delivered. So we're going to have to pay attention to it, but we will not be specifically in our outcome agreements asking for accountability for that resource, which isn't our resource.
So can I just clarify, yesterday was the first time you'd heard about that £24 million being ring-fenced for colleges?
That was the announcement that the Cabinet Secretary made yesterday in front of the college chairs and principals, yes.
Sorry, can I just be clear, that was the first time you heard it?
That was the first time I'd heard it,
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I wonder, Mr Sim, could I ask you, you've been very patient sitting, waiting. Obviously, University Scotland, along with the government, accepted for 2014-15 budget that the minimum level of the funding gap would be £97 million, and that funding gap would largely be addressed by making greater efficiencies within universities in terms of businesses and philanthropy having some impact to that. Do you believe that, in light of how student fees have been set elsewhere, that that is still a realistic figure?
Well, I think actually, if you look at our figures, which I have in here, but I'm recalling from memory, I think we said actually you're looking at an overall funding gap more in the region of 200 million, and that by the end of the spending review, that will be filled by a balance by the calculations of the expert technical group that worked over winter 2011. Through a combination of the additional public funding that's been allocated in the spending review and through what we're expecting to project from rest of UK fees, plus an assumption about efficiency. So our view is that the spending review settlement met the teaching funding gap as best it could, and we're certainly pleased to see that being perpetuated in these budget proposals.
If that 97 million, which was the stated figure that would be filled by making efficiencies and business contributions, etc., obviously in years to come, do you feel that there will be potential to make very significant savings further in university efficiencies and in terms of business and philanthropic donations to university, if you like, that will improve that situation?
I think actually what we projected in the expert technical group was an efficiency saving of 26 million. Yeah, I mean we have a lot of work in hand on the efficiencies front. In the last spending review period, we significantly overperformed in relation to efficiency. This time round, we've got the university experts sitting around in an efficiency task force. We've got programmes on ICT. On procurement, where we're already well ahead of other publicly funded sectors in terms of the amount of shared procurement that's being done and the realisation of savings. We've got experts from the sector working on how we can make further use of shared services and modernised business practices, particularly as the Treasury has to some degree liberalised the regime applying to VAT on shared services. And we've got the estates directors working at how you can make the estate work as hard as possible, both in terms of efficient space usage and in terms of making sure that we're moving towards our best possible contribution on carbon reduction. So I think our overall view remains what it was last year, that what was presented in the spending review is a balanced package of public investment, efficiency, and projections about what one might expect to realise through rest of UK fees.
Thank you. I'll come back to some of these points in just a minute. If we accept, obviously, that the recent trends, there was an increase in the number of Scottish domiciled students coming to study at Scottish universities, and also a considerable increase in those from the EU, both of which groups are paid for through the tax base. And there are capped situations within the universities for that. There are uncapped situations for rest of the UK students and international students who are obviously paying fees. Would it be your estimate that the funding gap, per se, is likely to increase in the coming years?
I think I would want to see how the situation pans out in England. I mean, our prediction was based on the aggregate amount of new income that we expected to go into the sector in England as a result of the Brown Review reforms which have been implemented there. And I think one has to let that run for at least a medium term before one can reassess whether the instabilities in the English system have settled down, and we've seen actually what the overall quantum of new income going into the sector in England is.
There are situations, rightly or wrongly, south of the border where obviously many of the English institutions are setting fees at a higher level than was originally predicted. that surely has a concern for Scottish universities in that the potential for increasing the funding gap is increasing.
What the technical expert group did was give us a formula, and then what we did when we were looking towards the spending review was actually sit down and look at what the average English fee had turned out to be once the access plans had been approved by the access regulator OFA, and I think that came out at about 7,881 approximately, if I'm remembering right. Once you've taken into account various discounts for students of limited means. You know, in our view, the funding, and we did work with on these figures with Scottish Government before the spending review was published. The spending review figures were predicated on the fee as it turned out in the first year of the new regime in England. Now, obviously, you want to keep an eye on that over that medium term as to what happens to fees levels in England and how the overall income pattern is working in England. But I do think that needs a bit of a medium-term run rather than making reappraisals when the situation in England is still pretty unstable.
My final question, Mr. Sim, if given what you're saying about a medium-term run, that means a bit of waiting to see what's going to take place. If the desire to make sure that the university sector is delivering some cost reductions, some savings, some efficiency savings, and that your estimates of what's going to happen in terms of the quality of delivery, which I think we all want to see, if that is happening at the same time as there is an uncapped system for rest of the UK and international students coming to Scotland, the pressure for some universities will be to ensure that the groups that they are taking of these students is providing some additional income, given that there is a funding gap south of the border. Is that correct?
I think there's two elements to that. One is, as a preface to answering that specific question, as I think members are well aware, there is a protected number of Scottish and EU places, and universities will in fact face fines if we don't recruit up to that number. And I think that the latest UCAS figures demonstrate that we are indeed recruiting up to that number, and in fact there are numbers of extra funded places in the system which will help that grow in future. But in relation to rest of UK fee income, yes, universities are dependent to an extent on the rest of UK fee income to make sure that we are in a competitive position vis-a-vis England, and indeed vis-a-vis being resourced to be internationally competitive as well as accessible. Now, the initial indications are that demand from the rest of the UK to Scotland has held up, in fact, slightly increased. So one would approach that with a degree of confidence, but again, that is a pattern that I think we would want to look at over the period of this spending review to see how that is in fact working out in practice.
Thank you.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. Just on the point of places, obviously there are funded places, but you need the students to be there to fill them. And in terms of the evidence that you gave in terms of acceptances that show that Scotland is up by 2%, but the rest of the UK is down by 15% in terms of acceptances at colleges, at universities rather. Is that? Do you think that's simply a direct result of the fee situation, or do you think there's other factors at play there?
I think, as far as Scotland's concerned, I mean, obviously the protection of home and EU places, and the injection of a few, certain numbers of extra places into the system has been good, and we have capacity there. I think in relation to contrast between Scotland and England, in relation to attraction of students from the rest of the UK, I mean, all I can say from Scotland's point of view is, we're extremely pleased that the quality of what we're offering here is attracting people, even if the aggregate number of applicants and acceptances in England has gone down significantly this year. I mean, I think the English system has not yet settled down to its final form. and not necessarily in terms of law and regulation, but in terms of people's reactions and behaviours. I think the first year has shown a degree of instability, and I think we in Scotland will look with interest on how that pans out, and whether by the end of the spending review we're seeing it settle into a more stable pattern.
McAlpine?
Yes, we heard from our panel from Scottish Development Council for the Development Industry that they were very concerned by the UK government's restrictions on immigration of foreign students. And obviously in your written evidence you talk about the significant earnings that you receive in this sector from foreign students. Do you share the concerns expressed earlier about the UK government's attitude to the immigration of foreign students?
I think we've been consistently clear that as the UK Borders Agency has revised the visa regime both for students in Tier 4 and for talented staff in Tier 2, there have been quite a number of concerns about the impact that may have both on our ability competitively to attract international students to what is recognised as a great destination for them, and in relation to potential difficulties of attracting and retaining highly talented academic staff. I think with I would have to say robust cross-party support from across this Parliament, we were able to push back to some extent on UKB proposals. We saw extension of the time limits that you were allowed to stay in the country to study, and that better reflected the length of Scotland's degrees. We saw some progress, not enough, but some progress on post-study entitlements to work. But I think, bluntly, the situation remains. The UK does not now have a competitive offer in the international market compared, for instance, to USA, Canada and Australia, all of whom know that keeping your borders open to the cross-border flow of talent internationally is just part of being a vibrant society and economy, quite apart from the economic impact for Scotland that we described. I mean, in the last year for which I have figures, 2010-11, £305.5 million of fees came from international students, which is a very significant amount, even in relation to the amounts we're talking about in this budget. And when you take what the economists advise and double that in terms of impact on the economy through the spend of these students, it's a really significant contribution to Scotland. And while we're extraordinarily grateful for the cross-party support that we have had in pushing back on UKBA, I still don't think they've allowed Britain to be in the competitive position that Scotland and the rest of the UK deserves to be in.
MacArthur?
I think Alice, you've given a fairly fair assessment of some of the success, but the fact that clearly more has to be done. I was less surprised by your suggestion that Canada and Australia have a more competitive proposition in the UK, but the US struck me as slightly odd, because certainly over the last number of years there have been complaints that, in a sense, there was almost a kind of shutdown of the US system, kind of post 9/11, I suppose, and thereafter. Have there been developments in the last sort of 2-3 years which have seen an opening up of that?
I mean, as I understand it, I mean, from stuff we've been looking at over the past months as we've been doing these international comparisons, and I wouldn't want to give you an exact quote from memory, but my perception is that they realised they had over-restricted and realised they had to re-liberalise because shutdown in terms of migration of talent is just so wrong if you're really trying to be a vibrant and outward-looking economy. So I think there's been a degree of swing of the pendulum there as they realised that actually being overly restrictive was stifling their own vitality.
I just want to have another quick kick at the funding gap. I mean, I'm a new boy here, but reading the papers over a long period, you see so many figures coming out about the funding gap, how much it is, and different people have different calculations for it, and I've seen huge figures and smaller figures. Would you agree that there's in fact so many variables involved in this that it's actually quite difficult to pin down that funding gap, which is a concern, obviously, for budgeting forward.
Actually, no, because I think over the winter of 2011, you know, some really exceptionally useful and detailed work was done in the technical expert group that looked at the scale of the funding challenge. I mean, what it did was take the projections of what might happen in England, but what more importantly was to give you a ready reckoner formula, so that you could take what was actually happening in England once it was known, run that through, and see what the funding gap would be. And I think you know, it comes up with a fairly robust figure that by 2014-15 was around the £200 million mark, and that then fed into, you know, our spending review negotiations with Scottish Government, where we were, you know, being extremely assertive that if you want to keep us in the game, both in terms of quality and competitiveness and in terms of inclusiveness, you have to address that. And I think through the combination we've described of contribution from public investment, efficiency assumptions that were made, and contribution from fees from Rescue UK students, you know, we got to the point where we could authentically say, you know, you've done the best you can within available resources to meet that teaching funding gap, and you know, that on the basis that was defined through that very detailed work between University of Scotland and government economists.
Have you actually done a model which takes extrapolates the funding gap beyond that period?
Yes, although I think coming back to what I've said earlier, you know, the instabilities in the English system would not give you a lot of confidence at the moment beyond 2014-15. I think what you see beyond 2014-15, so on the one hand, you know, one would expect income to the sector in England in aggregate to keep increasing. On the other hand, there's cohort effects of more people coming in, you know, on Rescue UK fees. So I think what has given us is a framework within which, as we come towards the end of this spending review period, and as we see how things have actually settled down in England, one can look again at that. But one would also want to look at it in relation to other comparators. I mean, I think going back a bit, but when the Scottish Government worked on New Horizons, they had an ambition that we should really be competitive in OECD terms in what we were investing in higher education. So I think, you know, come next spending review, let's see where we are. Let's see what's happening in England, but let's actually be aware of Scotland's place in a wider world where you know, part of our identity as a successful and prosperous and outward-facing nation is having a university sector that really punches very, very substantially above its weight internationally.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask, I don't know whether, Alistair, you had the chance to look at the evidence, the oral evidence we received last week, yes. And there was some discussion about the impact or lack of impact of growing the knowledge economy in terms of its impact on employability and the economy in general. Some of the evidence that we received, or some of the comments certainly received, I'm not sure I would call it evidence, but some of the comment we received cast some doubt on that. I just wondered if you had any views on that evidence about the impact of the university sector on growing the knowledge economy, and in particular on its direct impact on youth employability and the economy more widely.
Well, I'll maybe tackle that in two parts then. You know, first of all, really talking about connectivity with business, and then talking about employability. I mean, I think in terms of connectivity with business, you know, in our evidence we pointed out that universities in Scotland in the last year for which data available had done business with 9,000 Scottish companies, including 2,500 SMEs. I think, you know, through Interface, which provides a portal for small businesses to get into finding out how universities can help them, we've got a very good system. I think on knowledge exchange, I think we are potentially, you know, starting from a good place, but I think we're potentially looking at quite a promising further step change. I mean, we've already got new things come on board with universitytechnology.com as a front window for Scottish intellectual property. But I think through the work that University of Scotland and the Funding Council and SCDI and business did together to look at how do you build a single knowledge exchange organisation for Scotland that actually builds on existing strengths, but also potentially builds in new elements of strength from a closer relationship with the key sectors. I think we're in a good place, but potentially in a good place, it actually makes another step change up in terms of engagement with business. If I can revert to the second part of your question, which was really about graduate employability, I think this is a really fruitful area of work at the moment, and we were delighted that so many MSPs were able to come to our event in the Parliament last week, where we were showcasing a number of things that are being done to improve graduate employability. Amy Dalrymple, I think, made an exceptionally good point, which I think has been reflected back to us by a number of businesses, that one of the things is that students really need to be helped and encouraged to be self-reflective about the skills that they have developed at university. Actually, if you look at modern pedagogy, how are people being taught now? There's a lot of teamwork, there's a lot of working on real-world problems that are actually drawn from the world of employment and business. Work placements are a significant element of what some students are doing. So there's a lot there, and I think there is a challenge back to the sector. Make sure that students are self-reflective about that. And one of the things that might help that is the new higher education achievement record that's being introduced, which will mean that you're not just presenting at the end of your course with a profile of your grades. You're actually presenting with an account of what you did at university and achievements that you might have achieved that can be validated outside the formal curriculum. I think also, speaking to businesses, we are keen to see if more can be done to make sure that the opportunities that are available in the SME sector can be made as visible as possible to students. There's a lot of vibrancy in the SME sector. It's obviously not the sort of thing that's easy to pick up on in your kind of big employer milk round. But let's see if we can make those connections better. But there's a lot on those who were able to join us last week saw what Scottish Institute for Enterprise are doing, making the most of masters, where master's students are now actually getting work experience as well as doing academic study for credit. Third sector internships, which I think is a really good and possibly replicable model, where large numbers of students are now getting out there and getting real world experience in the third sector and getting credit for it. So we are looking to publish, I think, for the sector, an employability strategy towards the end of this year, which I would hope would capture a lot of the good things that are going on, but actually capture some of those elements where the conversations that we're having with business say, there's the opportunity for a further step change.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, just before I suspend, I have to say I was very interested in the issue about the educational assessment, higher educational assessment. Achievement record, yes, which I have to say, I think sounds a step forward. I know we all, those of us who got a degree, got a bit of paper, but beyond that, that was all we got. That was all we had to take to any employer. And I think it's often the case that employers were not sure what that actually meant in terms of skills. So I assume that particular document will be broader and more detailed.
Yeah. If it's helpful, we can write to the committee and just outline its current state of development.
That would be helpful. Thank you very much. Can I thank the witnesses for coming along this morning? It's been very helpful in making sure that we provide some detail in our report for the Finance Committee. And can I suspend very briefly before we move on to our final item? The third item on this morning's agenda is consideration of a negative statutory instrument. The committee considered SSI 2012-237 last week's meeting and agreed to write to the Scottish Government to clarify a number of points. The Scottish Government's response has been circulated to members. Do members wish to make any comment on the evidence we've received? Lee MacArthur.
So it was helpful, convener, I think, to pose these questions. I think maybe 3 out of the 4 of them, the responses were perfectly adequate. I think in relation to some of the specific points around the costings and the assumptions that were made, it would have been useful, I think, maybe to get a little bit more of the detail on that. But I don't think there's any reason to hold up approval of the SSI.
Members wish to comment on this SSI at this point? I thought that, from a personal point of view, I thought the government's response was indeed very helpful in answering many of the questions, and certainly allayed some of the fears that had been put to us. No motion to annul has been lodged in respect of this instrument. Therefore, does the committee agree to make no recommendation to the Parliament on SSI 2012-237? Thank you. Just before I close the meeting, obviously there has been some debate both last week and this week about the figures in terms of the budget, and I just wondered if members thought it might be helpful if I wrote to the Scottish Government on behalf of the committee to try and seek some clarification before the Cabinet Secretary came before us. Agreed? Okay, thank you very much. And